I'm a real petrolhead, as you know. I started collecting Renaults. So I started Renault 5 Turbo, then Renault 5 Alpine, Alpine A310, all those special Renaults. I got in a better position, traded in my Renaults and started collecting Porsches. So had a big collection of Porsches, Boxsters, 911s, everything. Had about 11 of them and sold them because financially it went better again with me, and started purchasing Ferraris. I bought my first Ferrari 348 Spider, yellow one, then another 355, 360, F430, the complete line of Ferraris, all Spider, all yellow. Enjoyed them a lot, really liked it, up until the moment that I drove with it, came to a traffic light, stood next to a bus full of children in my yellow 360 with an F1 gearbox. And at that time, when all the children were looking at me, at my yellow Ferrari, my gearbox said, yeah, good luck with it. I have weekend, I'm done with it. So I stood there and needed to push my car across the crossing and looked like an idiot. And I called my Ferrari dealer. I said, sorry, but everything needs to go back and get service. So my 360 went there, my 355 went there. And when I came there, there stood an ugly white with orange stripe Spyker C8 Spider. It was completely white. They spray painted it with a rattle can, and it was a prototype. And that caught my eye. It was a white body. I didn't know the story behind it, so I asked the gentleman, like, is this car for sale? Because I really liked the Spyker, first time seeing one. And I was able to purchase that specific Spyker, had a lot of work, and I purchased it for 80,000 euros at that time. It was expensive at that time for a Spyker because they were like not that expensive anymore. But I liked the heritage about it, liked the story about that specific car. It was the first wide body. It was an engineering car. It came out of, just when Spyker went bankrupt, it came out of that inventory because Spyker needed money. So they sold a few of their prototypes. But it didn't have a normal steering wheel. It had an ugly steering wheel. It was damaged all over the place, didn't have a splitter. It was a wreck. So I bought that car, traded in all my Ferraris and started with that Spyker. And I went on and started restoring it because it was ugly, didn't work anymore, didn't have leather interior. It was completely bare. They spray painted the dashboard, so it didn't have the turned aluminium. So somebody painted and that orange. It was ugly. Nothing worked. So I started restoring it and found out that it's really hard to get parts. So couldn't get parts anywhere. But I invented a few parts and started working and contacted Spyker. At that time, it had a Lotus steering wheel. So I asked the factory, do you have a propeller steering wheel? And they said, no, we're not allowed to sell them. You need to see if you can find one, and good luck with it. So I said, okay, couldn't find any because all the Spyker owners all over the world were looking for propeller steering wheels. So the ones that were in relation were at owners that wanted to fit it themselves. They had the steering wheel, didn't have the hub. So there was a community trying to get it to work, but they didn't succeed making it. So I thought to myself, let's make one myself. Started with my father making a sand cast out of a steering wheel that I lended from somebody and made the first sand cast steering wheel. Then needed to make the hub, needed to make all the other parts, and that's where I started. Made the wood, went to the Spyker upholsterer, asked if they had still leather, so made everything in-house. And at that time, the Spyker community reached out to me, say, hey Jasper, I see that you're making a steering wheel. Can you also make a steering wheel for us? So that's where I started making the steering wheels. But back to chassis number 013, so that's the first wide body. I really needed to strip down all the paint, did the chassis new, needed to do the wiring loom, and did everything from scratch and prove to myself for the first time that I can make parts. It didn't have the center caps, it didn't have all the parts that you need, it didn't have turned aluminium. So at that time I started to reach out to suppliers in the UK that also make the turned aluminium for Bugatti, if they also wanted to work with me to do my turned aluminium. So they said, we see what you do, let's also do your interior. So I then were in contact with the Bugatti people that also did it for Spyker to make the turned aluminium. And that's where I constantly started to grow my list of suppliers that worked for Spyker but didn't want to work for Spyker anymore because they didn't get paid. So what I at that time needed to do, unfortunately, was first pay for the work, and then they would consider working for me on my parts. And that's what happened with my first Spyker. I needed to first buy the parts and then get some parts in the end. And that's what with this car, it happened with interior too. I went to the old upholsterer from Spyker, and they knew exactly, had all the patterns and wanted to again work with me to, everybody that you talk to, all the suppliers really like working for this brand because they know its craftsmanship and they really love to get into the detail that it is to work for Spyker. So especially with the upholsterer, I did a color change on that car. So chassis number 13 was a car that was used as an engineering car at Cosworth. So they did all the engineering work for the suspension, brakes. So all the engineering work was done on that car. So in the beginning it was a small body. They converted to a wide body for testing purposes. So that's why it's also now a wide body. After that, so it was also tested as a bare aluminium car. So it didn't have a paint at all. So because, and that's also a rumor, I've never heard if that's true, it was bare aluminium until, let's say, I think the late 2010. Then at that point in time, the Spyker panel beaters, CPP in the UK, one of the owners, I think family members, had a wedding and they wanted to have a white Spyker. So they asked if they could use this car, and then they painted it white with orange details for that wedding. Just roughly they blasted over the car and it looked horrible, but that's what they did for that wedding. It was also, they painted the splitter because it was really an engineering car. For me, this is one of the hardest restorations because nothing was standard. And that's with Spyker, it was for me a journey because when I started with the 013, I really found out that, especially early ones, that's all the spikes are different. And that's also why it's, for me, it's still fun to do this, because every Spyker that you touch, you learn something. And with the Carman bodies, it's easier, but I found out that from chassis number 1 to 70, if I go to a service or they come to me, it can also happen that something is not as it should be because they didn't have the part or they couldn't source it and they sourced something else. I know this because I've now seen about and worked about, I think, 90% of all the cars in existence, and I travel the world to work on them. But every time I go somewhere, I always ask, do you have CPP or a Carman? Because if it's a Carman, I can wrench on those blindly. But the CPP cars, it's like working on a prototype every time again. So if you have a CPP and something happens, usually they need to ship the part to me so that I know the size and diameters of all the parts. Recently I've been to one and I thought I had the correct struts with me, but again, different size and the door would open too far. So that's, every time it's a challenge, and I don't get bored working on Spyker because they are all different. So that's about the double 12s. So the double 12s also, they are made always by CPP. So that's every time a challenge. So it's Coming back to 013, for me I learned a lot that every part that you have, it needs to be custom built. So luckily I have a huge network of panel beaters, upholsterers that are able to work in that manner, that they can turn around also or change their molds or change the parts that they build to accommodate the changes that also Spyker made during that time. And with 013, I learned a lot because it was still based, and they were doing a lot of race car inspired. That means that if you ever wrenched on a race car, usually all the wires are white. So that makes troubleshooting quite a challenge. And also with this car, all the wires were white. And luckily Spyker changed that, I think after 2-3 years. They knew, okay, if there's something wrong and there are only white wires, it's hard to troubleshoot. That's why it took me quite a long time to get 013 in the condition she is now. So roadworthy, reliable, but it's really hard to wrench on a very early car, especially this one. So I learned a lot from it. But it also had, for instance, it didn't have a fuel cap. It didn't have the steering wheel. It had different wheels. And that made me source all the parts that you think of. Everything is different. Everything has a story. All the cars have a story. And this one has a special story about being an engineering car, being offered publicly when Spyker went bankrupt. All the stories about every car makes this brand for me why I like it a lot. Like the story of owners, either an owner or an engineering background, or let's say a burned down background. That's what I like about these cars.
For the last 20 years or so, I've been working with Premier Financial Services for my own exotic car needs, but also sending friends and clients when I was a car dealer to Premier Financial Services because their simple lease is truly the most powerful tool in the world of exotic car financing. We love it because we get all the great things about leasing, like low upfronts, better tax treatment for business owners, lower sales taxes, but we also retain all the great things about a traditional finance arrangement, like the ability to accumulate equity, trade in and out whenever you want, and always know where your payoff stands because they give you an amortization table with every single lease. And Premier's been a supporter of VINwiki here for the last 8 years, and we love them for that, but truly because the customer support of the Premier Financial Services team is unmatched. And now that they're backed and wholly owned by First Financial Bank, that gives them even more buying power for their portfolio of the most significant and valuable collector and exotic cars in the world. It's also allowing them to create new and more interesting finance options and programs for their clients and giving them much more buying power, which is what everybody is looking for as they go on the search for their dream car. So check out Premier Financial Services right now at the link in the description below to thank them for their support of VINwiki and know that they'll be the perfect supporter of your journey to own your dream car.